Right. Oh, okay. um, Ironically, amid all of this that is happening in the world, I've come to understand that these are, in fact, the times when it's most crucial for us to find ways to experience joy and to live joyfully, not only for our own well being, but to make us better able to decrease the suffering of others. It is essential because joy strengthens our resilience and our sense of hope in the face of fear that allows us to, even in dangerous times like these, to act with compassion while we continue to fight the good fight for social justice. As someone who is a diversity worker, as you heard, for many years and remains morally committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I've learned that compassion fatigue is real. But I also know that through experience that the best way to keep at bay this fatigue is to cultivate a practice of living joyfully. Although I'm sure all of you know joy when you feel it. I'd like to start this discussion with a definition of joy, both from social science and from a biological perspective. The American Psychological Association defines joy as a feeling of extreme gladness, delight, or exultation of the spirit arising from a sense of well being or satisfaction. Most of us tend to use joy and happiness interchangeably. However, in an article published by the Harvard Medical School by Stephanie Collier, she distinguishes happiness and joy in this way. Happiness is said to refer to pleasurable feelings that result from a situation, experience, or objects. Joy is described as a state of mind, one of gladness, well being, or satisfaction, that can be found even in times of grief or uncertainty. So that suggests that joy is a skill that can be cultivated over time, and that is very important in terms of a distinction from happiness. Happiness is often triggered externally, while joy is something that comes from within and can be used to find happiness and contentment even in times of suffering. On a biological level, joy is a complex interaction of physiological responses that involve neurotransmitters that I'm sure you've all heard of before, related to positive feelings, and they include dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. Increasing these neurotransmitters in the brain can strengthen your immune system, improve pain management, decrease stress and depression, increase general resilience, and generally improve the quality of life, both physically and mentally. In this way, research shows us that joy has many measurable positives. We all know the feelings that sap our joy, right? Anxiety, fear, grief, loneliness, envy, anger, and despair. And while these are certainly normal and sometimes useful, they are reactive. And today, what I want to do is talk about emotions that are responsive rather than reactive. These are ways of being that are tools to help us respond skillfully and more joyfully in any circumstances. In the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they discuss 8 pillars of joy which represent skills essential to living joyfully. Specifically, they include 4 qualities that they call quality of the mind and 4 qualities that they call qualities of the heart. Specifically, qualities of the mind include perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance. Qualities of the heart are forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. Personally, following our most recent presidential election, these qualities have helped me to emerge from my cocoon of despair, particularly the habits of gaining perspective and acceptance. I'll share a few examples of how I gained perspective following the election, and some of you were part of that. I joined with people both online and in person, folks who, for the most part, shared my values. For example, I got online with 500 other Buddhists who, from around the globe, U.S., Mexico, other parts of the world, to talk about how they were experiencing the election and what they anticipated because of it. On the other extreme, I met in person here at Open Circle with a group of about 10 folks who talked about, what they were experiencing and feeling. So this was one way that I was able to gather with people who shared my values to gain perspective. Eventually, and I haven't had the chance to do this yet, I know that I will benefit from gathering of folks who have different values, who maybe voted for Trump and saw this as a positive thing. But given the divisiveness we have in our country today, I haven't had the opportunity to do that. But I look forward to it. I'm sure it'll take some humility, possibly even some humor to do that. So, another type of perspective taking that is always helpful when thinking about the ebb and flow of politics in particular is taking the long view, thinking about progress made over decades and even longer rather than just the short term. The recent protests about the actions of our president, and I know that some of you here took part in those, really helped me to know that I was not alone in my concerns and that, in fact, change is coming because that's the only thing we can depend on in this world is change. You might be surprised by this one, but at first, when I was really down after the election, I wasn't too active getting out and about and stuff. So television has been a source of joy and respite for me. Laughing at old sitcoms and old science fiction movies. I'm a big science fiction fan. Watching some HGTV, and even watching the news in reasonable doses with reliable sources to help me better understand what happened in the world. Helped me gain some perspective, and at times, not take things quite so seriously. However, my first step toward healing and regaining my joy in challenging situations is always working towards acceptance. Just to be clear, acceptance is not about resignation or defeat. It is about facing what is and setting a foundation for skillful action. According to the Buddhist tradition, the cause of much of our suffering is our inability to accept reality. This prevents us from facing the inevitable worldly winds, happiness and pain, with equanimity. And whenever I use that word equanimity, people are always asking, so what do you mean by equanimity? In the Journal of Positive Psychology, Anna Schaffner defines equanimity as a state of psychological balance and stability, evenness of mind and temper that allows us to navigate the curveballs that life may throw at us with grace and serenity. In the Buddhist tradition, equanimity is seen as balance born of wisdom. It is freedom from powerful reactions, positive or negative, to another person or an event. The ability to be even-minded toward everyone, no matter what they believe. Now, I was struggling with this right after the election. So it is an essential part of mindfulness, Jeannie, as your book was talking about. An awareness that is not disturbed by bias or fears, holding on or pushing away the past, or thinking about the future. It seems to me that equanimity is ultimately about being open to recognizing and understanding what is. The French philosopher and feminist Simone de Beauvoir also wrote about the importance of acceptance. She wrote, "It is in the recognition of genuine conditions of our lives that we gain a strength to act and our motivation to change." So, in fact, acceptance motivates us towards positive change, not to being resigned to things as they are. When I think about acceptance, the serenity prayer comes to mind. I'm sure all of you know it. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So living joyfully takes both courage and wisdom. There's a similar saying in the Buddhist tradition by the 8th century monk Shantideva. The Dalai Lama paraphrased it like this: Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use in being unhappy if it cannot be remedied? If you look at the life of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he's an excellent example of how acceptance leads to activism under the most soul crushing of circumstances without an individual losing their personal joy. When I think of Desmond Tutu, I see him with a smile, I see him dancing with the Dalai Lama, and from all accounts, he had a very joyful life. However, he was an African of Xhosa and Botswana heritage, born into the brutal racial apartheid system of South Africa. Not only did he work to end apartheid, but also presided over the truth and reconciliation efforts that followed, all while distinguishing himself in what I find to be an unusual area through the ranks of the Anglican Church. And so, while practicing nonviolence and by all accounts, as I said earlier, being joyful. Granted, he was an exceptional person living in exceptionally horrific conditions, but I share this example to say that if he can live joyfully under those circumstances, certainly given our relative privilege, we can find a way to live joyfully in order to diminish suffering in ourselves and others. If you've noticed, I tend to intellectualize things. So the habits of the minds were the tools that initially I used to help me find joy in my life. However, one quality of the heart has been particularly helpful to me in my struggles, and it is gratitude. The act of identifying good things in the world and attributing them many times to that external source, to a source outside of me. It's been a long practice of mine, either through journaling, writing, but most frequently through my practice of meditation. Research on the relationship between gratitude and mental health indicates that it shifts our attention away from the toxic emotions such as resentment. We hear a lot about resentment motivating people to vote for the person I didn't want them to vote for. It seems to prevent rumination and focusing on the negative, which is generally a cognitive bias that we have. You can understand how paying attention to bad things, especially a long time ago when we were living in caves or living outside, was important, but we still have that in our brains, a cognitive bias, a negativity bias, to focus on the negative. So gratitude helps us move away from that. It actually appears to change the way our brain functions by activating the medial frontal cortex. But like everything, you can't just be grateful once. It is an ongoing practice, like everything I'm discussing today. Some additional strategies for finding joy that you might be familiar with are things like exercise. Now, I know that sometimes it can be hard to get up and do that, but once I do, I certainly feel my spirits lifted. Meditation and connecting with your spiritual side. Shifting your focus to the good. Like I said, we tend to have a negativity bias. Reframing negative events, considering, is there something that could come good out of this? Or, remembering that this too shall pass. Also, getting out and experiencing something new. Our brains are hardwired, once again, to associate the novel with joy. So experiencing something new. Helping others, and doing something you've enjoyed in the past. If all else fails, do something that you've enjoyed in the past. And for me, that is often listening to music. We have a wonderful tradition here. Thank you, BJ and Ellen, today for the wonderful musical meditations. Thank you, Ellen, for leading us in the beautiful songs. But they always have associations with me of the best times, in my life. Fun, they energize me. But I also use music to work through the inevitable sort of negative emotions, sadness, loss, loneliness. Listening to a little Mary J. Blige or, sometimes Adele in a He Done Me Wrong song, really allows me just to immerse myself in that feeling of sadness or loss. The thing that I really go to when I need to work through some sadness is actually the Brahms Third Symphony, in particular the third movement. It just is very emotional and really lets me sort of wallow in my feelings and helps me begin that process of working out. Music also helps me imagine a different future and motivates me to activism. You know, the song that comes to mind when I say this is Beatles' Imagine, that song, or Public Enemy's Fight the Power, right? We all are in that mood now, I think. So what I've talked about so far has been sort of individual joy, but we can experience sympathetic joy on behalf of others or joy from activities with others. The French sociologist Emile Durkheim called collective effervescence. It's a type of group joy that he described as an experience of connection, communal emotion, and a sense of the sacred that we get when we're working for causes larger than ourselves. An example would be the intense emotions you feel during a Packers game or when you're taking part in some type of protest. In fact, all that I've read and learned and experienced suggests that we are most joyful when we are doing things with others, right? And so that is something that, to me, if you don't remember anything else I've said, remember that by doing things to and for someone else, we can experience great joy. So just go out and be kind to someone else and see what happens. I know I don't have to really, I'm preaching to the choir at this point, but that is kind of the key. Finally, I'd like to talk a bit about the relationship of joy and justice, a topic that's particularly important, I think, given the current politics of the moment. And I'll start just with a story of my struggles. And like I said, I'm an optimistic person, but I really have been having to work on being joyful lately. And that all began the night of the election. Although I realize there are many who are happy with the outcome of our recent presidential election, for me, it shook my world. Being the clear-eyed optimist that I was, I'd always believed that the arc of the moral universe bent towards justice, no matter who was president during my lifetime. However, the election of Donald Trump for the second time made me seriously question that assumption as I saw the moral arc of our country turning towards selfishness, greed, and short-sightedness in a way that could cause us great harm. Could be wrong, but the first few months, I think, have sort of played into that feeling. The evening of the election, when votes began to be reported, I understood that it might be close, but I was cautiously optimistic that my Democratic candidate would prevail. Given the history in the United States, I knew that electing a woman, any woman, but particularly a woman of color, would be something new for us. But given the pre-election polling and predictions, as well as the way in which my candidate ran her short campaign, a campaign, by the way, that focused on joy, I was hopeful. Nonetheless, fairly soon in the evening, after a significant number of results were in, a feeling of dread began to come over me. So I went to bed early, steeling myself for the bad news to come in the morning. I was fortunate to have my son there visiting. He and my husband came into the bedroom trying to comfort me. I mean, I was really a mess at the time. My dear husband, who's here with me today, cajoled me. He said, "It's not over yet." My son added, "If it goes wrong, we'll get through it. Our ancestors survived worse." And as I pulled the covers over my head, I told them to just let me grieve, that I'd be better in the morning. And this was a response, once again, of a self-proclaimed, clear-eyed optimist. I could see no positive in the situation. I thought the U.S. experiment in multicultural democracy, in which we're all a part, was taking a wrong turn, a turn that would take us off the path of a slow but circuitous, but also steady march towards justice. And most of all, I felt let down by my fellow citizens. To be honest, again, the first few months of the second Trump presidency have been worse than I imagined. But today, I don't know if you saw me coming in, I can smile and hug and have a good time. Today, I'm experiencing a lot more joy because, first of all, I've done all those things that I talked about earlier to try and enhance my joy and cultivate joy, but also because I've come to understand the relationship between joy and justice. Joy and justice are inextricable. Working for social justice is really about working to create a system in which every human being is valued equally, that acknowledges our interdependence. And what could be more joyful than that? In an interview with the Tricycle Buddhist Review, Kamala Majid, author of Joyfully Just, put it this way: what joyfully pursuing justice means is releasing some of the negative self talk and oppressive ideas that we've internalized about ourselves, while also releasing oppressive ideas that we've internalized about other people. From my perspective, this frees us up to creatively find mutually advantageous solutions to our shared problems. Embodying this mutuality and interdependence is what can create the most joy for us all and is a counterpoint to the zero-sum game we are currently in, where there's got to be winners and losers. All of us, I believe, can be winners. In the interview, Majid goes on to talk about the wisdom tradition used by African Americans in their struggle for justice, embodied in joyful music, jazz, hip hop, blues, spirituals, and the art they've created while being subjected to, terrible oppression. She called it self-transcendent practice of hope in the midst of joy. In the midst of grief. So let me say that again. She called it a self-transcendent practice of hope in the midst of grief. On the day after the election, my son, who's also a musician, shared a similar message of hope to hearten me when he lifted up the struggles of our ancestors out of slavery as proof that we could get through this or anything that came our way. Perhaps the process of overcoming extreme suffering that is part of a shared human experience causes us to recognize, cherish, and even feel joy more deeply. And I think this is just what we need in this moment, a self-transcendent practice to help us join with others, to do the work that needs to be done, to celebrate simply being able to work toward our liberation for another day. So let us make the 8 pillars of joy a practice to help ourselves and others transcend suffering in this less than perfect world. Remember the skills that would help us experience more joy? The 4 habits of the mind: perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance, as well as the 4 qualities of the heart: forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. To me, the most critical of these, although they're all important and they work for different people in different ways, are the skills of perspective, acceptance, gratitude, and compassion, including self-compassion. You must show yourself some love before you can authentically engage in truly transcendent, effervescent joy of doing good things for others long term. To help you develop this practice of living more joyfully, there are a couple of online resources I recommend. NPR's Joy Generator on the National Public Radio. It has an online program that can just take a few minutes and it can lift your spirits, whether it's transporting you to a beautiful scenery, music, different practices you can do, or take part in the Greater Good Science Center's Big Joy Project. Again, another online resource to help you at your own pace. And of course, I recommend The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu with Douglas Abrams. I'd like to end us with a moment of reflection in which we send into the world the intention that we will live more joyfully. The words I use to finish the meditation are adapted from a guide to the Buddha Vista's way of life. So now, if you could please sit back comfortably in your chair, place your hands in your lap, and close your eyes or choose something on which to focus your gaze. Let's take a deep breath in and let it out. Take another deep breath in and let it out. Let's take one more deep breath in and take a few seconds to simply relax in the moment, thankful for this opportunity to rest and reflect. Now think of something or someone that brings you joy. Create an image in your mind and let this feeling of joy surround you. Now, with your eyes closed, please silently repeat after me. May all beings everywhere, plagued by suffering of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. Take one more deep breath in. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you.